Hello, my name is Kevin Pearies. I am a Senior Applications Engineer at Expo. And today we'll be covering FastReporter 2 and my personal workflow. So FastReporter 2 is really near and dear to my heart. Back when I used to manage test data for a Tier 1 provider, one of my challenges was taking that test data and putting it into a format that was deliverable to our engineering group, to our customers, or somebody internal, so wherever it had to go. So that was one of the challenges of being able to analyze that test data and then put it into a kind of a closeout package. And so today we'll be covering basically how I do that. I will be managing and analyzing OTDR and OLTS traces. And so let's go ahead and jump right into that. So basically, this is the main interface for FastReporter 2. So once FastReporter 2 first fires up, this is essentially what it's going to look like here. And so to give you an idea of what the screen looks like, so up here in the top left, we have basically our menu structure. So File, Settings. This is where you'll set your thresholds and your parameters, distance units, those types of things, generating reports. That's where, that's all going to be in the menu section up there. So we'll be talking about that. And then just below that, in this lower section here, we're going to have basically a lot of different icons. And these icons will either be grayed out or active depending on the test file that you have selected. And so if I have an OTDR selected, then some of those icons will become available to me so I can use them. All of these options are also in the above menu as well. So you can drill down through the above menu, or you can use the icons themselves. And then kind of the rest of the screen here, what we have is this section over here is going to be where we see the actual trace graphs themselves. So to see that OTDR trace graph or to look at the OLTS results individually, that's where that's going to be. Just below that, we have basically the results area. So we will be spending a lot of time down in this region here. This is where I will clean up my syntax, the header information, analyze traces, those types of things are going to happen down there. And then over here to the right, we have basically, this is where the actual files are going to be itself, right? And so all the files that we have loaded or all the traces that we have loaded will live in that area down there. And they'll even be broken up into sections as well. And so you'll see down here we have 4 different tabs. And so we have the Files tab. So that's to look at the actual file itself. So as I drag in a trace file, that's to select that physical file and whatever's within that file. Next to that is the Measurement tab. That's to look at the individual measurements and stuff. The identifiers, so you can group your traces by identifiers, fiber 1, fiber 2, that type of stuff. And then the very last one is Match files. And we'll get more into that later on. The match files is where we match up our traces together. The A to B, the B to A on fiber number 1, along with the OLTS, they all have to be matched together. So when you generate a report, it puts it all on the same column and row. And so, let's jump into this real quick. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set up a project. So with FastReporter 2, project files basically are ways for us to set thresholds and parameters, distance units and whatnot. So when you generate a report, we'll do the analysis and whatnot based on those parameters. And so you might have projects for different customers, internally or externally. So if you're doing some hyperscale activities, and you'll have different thresholds for that type of a customer. If you're doing long haul transport, power and utilities, all of these different types of companies have different parameters that they use. And so you can set those for each individual customer that you have there. And so to do that, basically what you can do is I'm going to jump straight into the settings here. So up here, in the settings, I'm going to get into this and I'm going to set some individual parameters for the project as well as for the different test types that I'm doing. And so the very first one you see over here is project settings. So I'm going to go ahead and select project settings. And this will allow me to set up any identifiers if I want on the project, my name, title, author, those types of things. I usually leave this blank. If it's for a specific customer, then I might fill that in as well. File matching is really important. File matching is how we match the files. How are we matching them? Are we matching them by the actual physical file name? So the way that we have the syntax of the file name, put together, it will match fiber 1 with fiber 1 based on that information. We can match on cable ID, fiber ID, custom parameters, all of that stuff. So you'll see up here how it's supported right now is I am matching based on these parameters here, right? Cable ID, fiber ID. What that means is if the cable ID equals 1 and the fiber ID equals 10, so every file that has 1 and 10, exactly the same, it's going to match those together. So when it generates a report, it knows which is the A side and which is the B side, stuff like that, right? Normally, I like to do simple file matching. I just usually do it by fiber ID. So I'll typically uncheck, these other selections here. And that way I'm only matching by fiber ID. But of course, there's a challenge there because just because it's fiber 1 or port or connector 1 on the hub side doesn't mean the remote side is also the same number. In fact, they're often different. And I'll show you one way that I get around that. So we'll talk about that as well. And again, you can do lots of different types of matching. This is just the type of matching that I do. We're not going to get into the other tabs because, this is not meant to be an all-inclusive deep dive into the interface, just kind of a quick workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply and hit OK. And that's the first thing that I said is my project settings. Then I go back into settings, and I told you I'll be doing OTDR and OLTS. So I'll go into the OTDR tab, and then you'll see up here we have the pass-fail thresholds. So I will select that, and this is where I'm going to set my pass-fail thresholds. So right now you have two different options to do that. And so over here in the top, it says use event calculations and thresholds from the measurement file. So what they're saying is however it was set up in the test set, we want you to use those parameters when you do the reporting and analysis. And then we have this bottom one here where it basically says use event calculation and thresholds from the application. The application being FastReporter, which is what I prefer to do. I don't, for consistency's sake and to make sure that I have the right settings in there, I like to set the settings myself within FastReporter and then do the analysis based on that, right? So I'm going to go ahead and select that bottom radio button there, and you'll see that that opens up the options down here to set my thresholds per wavelength. And so the two wavelengths that I'm testing today are going to be 1310 and 1550. So I'm going to get into 1310, and you'll see the different options here. Unidirectional, bidirectional, splice loss, reflection, section attenuation, all the common things that you see for thresholds. I am doing a bidirectional report today, so I only really care about bidirectional analysis in this case. So I'm not doing any unidirectional pass-fails. I'm not doing any section information. So normally, I actually end up turning off a lot of this. So I'm going to turn off all of my unidirectional stuff because I'm only doing bidirectional analysis today. I almost always turn off, well, in fact, I always turn off span loss and span length and section attenuation. And let me tell you why. Span loss will vary. And so that's a pass-fail based on how much loss you require. Now, if it's an engineered system like fiber to the home or, some sort of a, front haul situation where they want 3 dB or less, then you can put in a threshold for loss, right? To make sure you don't exceed the budgeted loss for that type of architecture. And then, of course, the other one's length. And length will vary. Is 10,000 feet passing or is it 100,000 feet passing? It'll vary on each span. So I normally turn those off. For span ORL, if I'm testing with an OLTS that does ORL, like the Max 945, then I'll turn this off and then use the Max 945 for my ORL because it does it uses a continuous wave source. So I prefer the results from the OLTS. In this case here, I'll leave it on and I'll set it for, say, 28, which is a fairly common number that we see for ORL. We see most companies doing 27 or better. 28 is kind of the middle ground for a lot of folks. We'll see it as high as 30 or 32, particularly if you're doing video systems. And then starting back up the top here, I'll go to splice loss. So what's a good splice loss here? So this will vary depending on your organization. I might set this one at 0.2, might be 0.1, whatever it happens to be. Connector loss, we see a lot about half a dB or better. And then reflection, neg 45, neg 50 in that range is what we typically see. Usually in the neg 45 and, or even down in neg 40 range. It really depends on your organization and your customer on what these thresholds are going to be, right? I will also turn off down here at the very bottom the spanned end value. So this is the open. If I have a receive cable, then I want to leave that on. In this situation, I don't want to measure that end there, right? But let's keep something else in mind here. This is 1310. So let me take a step back here. 1310 often has higher attenuation than 1550. So I might set these values a little bit higher for 1310 than I would 1550. So I might go as high as 0.35 on a splice, or I might go as high as 0.75 for a connector. And so reflection and ORL, I'm not overly worried about between the two wavelengths to a large degree. But keep in mind, 1310 does have more attenuation, more loss at every splice and connector. So typically I'll set that at a higher value or turn it off altogether. For 1550, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn off all of the unidirectional stuff. I'm going to turn off the section information and then just set this up. So here I'll set the splice loss at 0.2. The connector loss is 0.5. Neg 45 for the connector reflection. I'll turn off the section attenuation. I don't like section attenuation because that's the loss per kilometer between sections, so between splices. If you have two splices that are 1,000 feet apart, that number is going to be skewed because there's not enough distance to average that number down, right? It's like trying to get miles per gallon, but you drive around the block once. We need some distance for that number to be consistently, where it should be. And then for ORL, again, I'll put back in there 28. And so this is essentially what I'm doing here for the pass-fail parameters on this. I'll go ahead and hit OK and apply. And so we have the OTDR set up. You would do the same thing for the OLTS, for fiber inspection probes, for CDPMD, whatever test that you have loaded into the unit, you can set up for. So to give you an idea of what test is supported by this, you'll see that we have OTDR, OLTS, optical power meters, PON power meters, chromatic dispersion, polarized mode dispersion, and IOLM, which is our advanced OTDR. So now that I have that all set, I've gone in and set all my parameters up. I've gone into tools up here and into options, and then set my distance under display. So under display here, we have essentially our distance, right? So we have our distance right here. So we'll set that to whatever. I normally set it for kilometers because a lot of the standards and specs are built around kilometers. So you can set it to whatever your company prefers. In this case, I'll leave it on kilometers. So once I have that all set up, I just need to start pulling files in, right? And so there's several ways to pull files in. You can go to File, Open, just like you traditionally would with any sort of application. In this case here, I like to drag and drop. And so I have several folders here. The OTDR folder has my bidirectional OTDR shots, right? It has the B side and the A side here. And so naming convention is incredibly important for me. And so my naming convention that I like to use is basically A location, underscore B location, underscore the fiber ID. That's a bare minimum there. So I'm going from Goodyear, Arizona to Phoenix, Arizona, fiber 71 on one side and fiber 1 on the other. So you see how they're not matching, right? Because they have different port counts or they have different strand numbers or whatever it happens to be. So I'm going to take all the OTDR traces as well as OLTS, or our OLTS is one file with multiple traces in there, right? And so I'm going to highlight both of these folders. Then I'm just going to grab it and then drag it into FastReporter over here on the right side and then let it go. And then it'll absorb it in. So FastReporter's already pulled it all in. Now it's time for us to analyze. One thing that I like to do when I do my naming convention is I like to try and use a naming convention for my files that sorts alphabetically. And so, sometimes you'll get a bunch of files and it'll go from 1 to 1.1 to 1.2 to 1.3. So it's not really in order. I like to name my traces so they alphabetically arrange, which makes it easier for me to manage. And so one of the first things I do is I'm going to take my mouse here and I'm going to hover it just over between file name and type. And then I'll drag it over so I can see the full file name. This is one of the first things that I do right here, right? All of these windows will detach. So if I wanted to take one of these windows and then pull them off and then put it, and put it somewhere else, like on a different screen, I could do that, right? Or if I want to put it back or reorganize it in a certain way, I can do that. They can all resize depending on which window that you're focusing on. In this case right here in the very beginning, I'm going to focus on the files window. And as I mentioned before, down here where it says files, that's actually the actual file name. So you can see these are the actual file names that are in the directory. Under measurement, we can see the different measurements. So the individual OLTS traces, the individual OTDR traces by wavelength. So that's what the measurement allows you to do. The identifier sorts it by fiber identifiers. Now, this is a little bit of a mess because we haven't organized it yet. But once we have it all organized, all the fiber 71s will be together, all the fiber 72s will be together, and all the tests for fiber 72 will be together. In match files, we're looking to match these all together. And so I have 3 tests, so I expect to see 3 files on every line. And you can see I only have 2 for most of these, and then this third one's all by itself. So we need to get these all arranged and fixed. And so we're going to go ahead and do that. So here's the first thing I do. Once my traces are loaded, I will highlight any one of the traces over on the right side. Then I will hold down Control A. And so Control A will highlight all my traces for me. And so it's done that. And so if I look down here in the bottom left, here's what all my highlighted traces look like. So I'm looking to fix all of this information. And so much of this information is actually the exact same bit of information, meaning if I look here at job ID, customer information, all that stuff here, over here in the bottom right, all of this stuff should be the same information. So none of this should be different. Same customer name, same company name, same operators, well, to a large degree, the same operators. Same job ID. Those are typically common identifiers that are shared across all the tests. And then I also want to make sure that I don't have any semicolons or extra identifiers. So if you look over here in the middle, I have a lot of these identifiers where there's 2 fields for each line. So some of the traces say fiber ID and some of the traces say cable ID. I don't want that. I want them all to be exactly the same. So I need to fix all of that, right? And the reason why these are out of order and out of sequence is because this is how they were tested in the field, right? I try not to work on the original traces, so I usually make a copy that comes from the field, and then I only work on the copies, right? So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get in here, and I'm gonna fix all of the common identifiers, every single one of them. So I'm gonna get in here and say, okay, the job ID, we'll just say, job 897. And so as fast as I'm typing here, it is fixing this information. And even if there's something in the cell and it looks correct, I still do it again, just in case one of them is blank, right? Because one of these could be blank, missing, say, Patrick's name here. And if I hit Control A, we're not going to know that one of them's missing, right? So that's why normally when I go in there, I will, I'll go in there and just redo them all again. Just like that, right? So now that I've fixed all of that, I'm done with that portion of the traces. So those portions of the traces over there are now complete. So now I need to fix the identifiers here in the middle, and these are the critical ones for matching. And I like to sort these in a very, very specific order. And so how I do that is this top here is usually fiber ID. So I sort it by fiber ID, or I'm sorry, cable ID, fiber ID, location A, location B, and then none. That's my most common setup. And again, this is my workflow we're talking about here, right? So I'm gonna get in here and fix all of this. The good news is my file naming structure is very clear. I know exactly which is the A side, which is the B side, and the identifiers for those sites. And I also know what the port or strand number is for each one of these because it's here, right? So working off of the naming convention alone, I can fix all of these files. So I'm not worried about not having the data. So here's the first thing I do. I will get in here and fix all of these. And you notice these are gray. They're gray because some of them are different and locked. So I will start with each file type in each direction first. So right now I have selected only the OLTS. And then within the OLTS, we have all these traces here, right? So we have multiple traces. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fix all of this. So remember, the top one is cable ID. Then I go to fiber ID. Then I go to location A. And then I add location B. And so location B here. So that's what I have here. I want to do this for all of them. So I'm going to click on the next set. So I'm going to click the 12 fibers going in this one direction. I'm going to check it. Okay, cable ID, good. Fiber ID, location A, location B. This is good. I don't need to touch it. Then I check this last section here. And it is also good. So I don't need to fix these identifiers anymore. So now if I highlight them all, we'll see that we're the exact same all the way across. And that's what we want, right? We want this whole section here to be the same. And that's what I've done here. Now I need to clean up the values that go into that. And so I do it kind of a unique way. I set the A location as the hub or the central office or the head end or whatever your office is. If you're testing from the office to the remote, I usually like to have the office as the A side. If you're testing from office to office, then I usually do it counterclockwise. So if I have a site sitting here and one over here to the northeast, the one that's more centered is the A location. I know that's just my workflow. That's the way that I do it, right? So I'd like to have the location A and location B set. Typically, when you're testing, the location A is what you're standing in front of. So this tester was standing in Goodyear and testing. So that's their location A. This technician was standing in Phoenix. So that's their location A, right? So that's how test gets set up. And I wouldn't change that at all. But I do, for my reporting purposes, like to keep it the same. So in this case here, I'll say, you know what? Goodyear, Arizona, which is where I live, is the A location. And then Phoenix is the remote side. Boom. Now that's done. I've managed that. Now I need to fix the cable ID and the fiber ID. And so in this particular example, I built a custom template that takes the cable ID and converts it to fiber ID B or fiber ID Z. So fiber ID on the far end. So if you want to match or include your fiber ID on the far end, you can. So I created a custom report that does that. So the fiber ID is the port count on the A side. And in this example, the cable ID is the port count on the B side. And so I just didn't change this identifier name, but in the report, when I print it, you'll see that it's changed in the report. So for me to be able to increment two values sequentially, we have something called auto naming, and so or auto documentation rather. So you have to select each side individually. So right now I have the OLTS file selected. I will right click and then go to auto documentation. It'll open up this window here. And so we have two sections. We can either auto document based on the fiber ID, or we can auto document based on these identifiers down here. And I'm going to do a combination of both of those and then get you that information. And so looking at this here, I'm going to go ahead and select all identifiers first. And I want to increment cable ID. I don't want to increment any of these other ones here. So leave everything checked on the left and then uncheck under incrementation. You want to uncheck some of these. Uncheck that one, uncheck that one. Because if you don't, look, it's going to try to increment it. We don't want to increment that. So we'll uncheck this. The only thing we want to increment is the cable ID. I want to make sure that this value here is blank. And then I'm going to start to count. And on the B, and so remember, cable ID is the B side count. And this starts at 0001. And then I'll put this at 9999, 4 nines. Just, it'll automatically stop when it gets to the max number. Then I'll hit OK. And as soon as I do that, you'll notice that we've incremented the cable ID or fiber ID B in this situation. It is now 1 through 12. Then I will right click again, do auto documentation, and then only do fiber ID. So I'll only do fiber ID here. I don't like having a prefix, so I'll delete that. And then this is going to start actually at a different number. So if you look at it over here, it starts at 71. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to go to 4 digits because I am dealing with a lot of 1728 fibers now. So I want 4 digits, 0073. All right, I'm going to go 0073. Then I'm going to hit OK. And then it's going to increment in. So now look at that. Now we have the fiber ID incremented, and we have this incremented. If we look down here at match files, we don't have any, good match files here yet, but we're still working on this. Then I do the next side. So just the A side of the OTDR. So I have all 12 fibers selected. And normally what I do is I'll select the first file, trace, I'll hold down the shift button and then click on the last one and it'll highlight all those. And I'll right click. And then all I'm doing is the same thing, auto documentation. All identifiers, I'll uncheck everything. I'll clear the value. And then I'll start this at, 0001 and then work its way up, right? In this case here, this one's actually already right, so I don't need to do anything. So if you look at it, this one is right. And so we don't have to touch this at all. So let's check this other side here. There's 2 things that I have to do here. One, I have to set the direction. So you see the direction is not set. It's still for, A to B. So I'll right click, set my directions, B to A. So now I've set my directions for B to A. Then I'll right click again, auto document, all identifiers. We're going to fix the cable ID first again, remember? So this one's going to be 0001, and this one's going to be 9999, right? And then I right click again, auto documentation, and I'm going to do the fiber ID. And this is going to be 73 working, or actually it's going to be 71. I said 73, it's actually 71. So 0071, and then working its way up. So that means I'm going to have to fix the OLTS because I set that at 0073. So I'm going to fix that. So there we go. See how easy it is to fix something when you mess it up? And so now if I hit Control A here, if I go to match files in the bottom right, you will see that I have over here all of these matching. So for fiber number 71, there's an OTDR trace. Going from the A side, there's an OTDR trace on the B side, and then there's an OLTS trace. It's incredibly important to get these matching because when you do custom reports or you try to create a report that does multiple file types, it's not going to put them all in the same column if you don't have them matching. So I have them matching here. At this point, if I wanted to save everything to the trace, I can. And so all of this work that I've done, if I go up here to File and then Save Selected Files, or hit Control S, it'll save all the changes that I just did to the actual trace file itself. So when I open it up later, it'll all be done. I won't have to do it again. I'm not going to do that in this case here because this is my demo traces. So I don't want to have to redo them all again. But that's what you would normally do. If it's late in the day and you want to go home and you're only half done, you can save where you've left off, right? So right now I can save where I've left off by creating a project. So if I go to File, Save Project As, and I click on that. So I save this project as, I can give it a name. Say training for OLTS. And so when I come back on Monday morning, I would just click on that project and hit open, and it'll pull everything back in from where it left off, right? So we have all of that as well. Another thing that you need to make sure and do is, when you save all of the settings that we talked about earlier, so under settings here, when I did the project settings and I did the OTDR thresholds and stuff, it's important that you save that as a template and then give it a name. And so whatever, you want to name it. If it's a specific customer, you can name them that. If it's a specific project, you can name it that. So that way, every time you do a new report, you just go to File, New, Project, and then select that project that you're working and then import it in. It'll pull all the thresholds in so you don't have to do it again, right? So that's one step that I didn't cover in the very beginning there. Just reminded me of this when I was talking about the projects. So now that we have this all set, I can either generate a report or, more importantly, analyze my data. And so with everything selected, you see I don't have a lot of options here in the bottom left at all, right? I don't have a lot of options down here, just the identifiers. I need to select these individually. So if I select just the OLTS, then I have some options here. I have the, I can look at the identifiers for the OLTS, the units, serial numbers, all of that fun stuff. I can look at the summary, which just comes up with, kind of a high-level summary of everything that was set up and tested, thresholds that were set for OLTS, and then more importantly, the FastReporter table. So this table here is what we're looking at. All right, you see everything's green, so we're passing. My ORL is really good. It's up in 35 level range and that kind of stuff right there. And you can see the reference values and the loss values here. So the loss from A to B and the loss from B to A. So you can analyze all the data there, right? If I want to look at the OTDR traces, I can either select them individually or I can select them all at once, which is what I like to do. And then I can get in here and I can analyze the data to see what's passing, what's failing. I'm looking for stuff that are red. In this case here, everything looks pretty good, right? Because my thresholds are set pretty high. So I don't have any fails here, but if I did, then I'd have something red. So I can get in here and set, say, an OTDR threshold. Let me set something that'll fail, just so we have something to look at here. So I'll set this for, we'll set this for neg 47 or something like that. Oh, 47 rather. And so if I hit OK here, now we got some fails coming in, right? And so now we got some fails coming in here. And so, that's basically what we're looking at here. If you need to null out the launch cable, you can do that as well. So let's say that the launch cable is over here. I can set this as span start. So now this is the launch. But if this is my launch cable here, which it actually is, then I can select that area there and set as span start. See how I did that? You set it span start. If you need to inject or add events, because believe it or not, we can. In this case here, we're not doing it because these traces are the exact same fiber that I tested 24 times. But if you look at event number 3 here, it's a reflective event. 24 of 24 of the files have an event here. This is not always the case. Usually it'll be 20 of 24, right? If it's 20 of 24 and you want to add the other 4 in there, what it does is it takes the 4 markers that it used to measure one of the existing splices or connectors, and it shifts it down and measures what is at that location on the other fibers. So it's really, really cool. So for example, if I wanted to add it, I select this and then click Add to Other Measurements. It's grayed out for me because it's 24 of 24. So, there's not a lot you can do there. If you need to reanalyze the traces, we can do that as well. If you need to change any of the detection thresholds, any of these things here and reanalyze it, we can, and it'll reanalyze it to those specifications. And you'll see up here, under the OTDR, there's a lot of different options you have here. Setting your markers, inserting events based on marker placement, locking your markers. You can even click this button here to separate your traces a little bit so you can see a little bit better, or bring it back in. I like to use hotkeys. So if you hold down the Control and the Alt button, and then use your scroll mouse, you can do this. If I do Control Shift, then I can do this, right? And then I can just, move them around. If I do, just Control, then I can do them, expand in both directions. So this is actually really, really nice if you want to get in there really quick and analyze data. And so, and then if I want to get back to 100%, then I just click back on, over here, 1-to-1, and I'm back at 100%. So there's a lot of different things you can do. I don't want to get too deep into the little nuances. I really wanted to talk more about my workflow, right? So now that I've gone in there and cleaned up all of this data, right? So we have all of this data in there and it's nice and cleaned up. I can now generate a report. So up here, I have everything selected. If I go to Tools, Report, I have a lot of different options for reports. So by default, there are pre-canned reports. And so for OTDRs, they're under broadband, measurement, and then you have your different OTDR traces here, right? Advanced cable. So if I were to click advanced cable, which is one of the generic reports, and I just, I can give it a name, advanced, cable, or whatever it happens to be if my fingers will cooperate here. And I'm gonna leave it in the documents folder, right? I'm gonna export this as an Excel. And I'll show you why. You can do PDFs as well. So I'm gonna export it as an Excel. I'm gonna hit OK. It's going to take all of the OTDR test data and put it into what we call an advanced cable report. So this it's got a lot of information in it, right? So it's opening up on my other monitor here, so I'll pull it over. So here's what the advanced cable report looks like. So we have a tab that's just the cable information, a tab that's all the measurement information, so how it was set up, everything that failed, a length report, a reflection report, a splice and a reflection report, a splice loss report. I don't have any splice losses on this at least very many of them, because these are actually all connectors. I do have some APCs that have low reflection. I have an attenuation report, and I have a loss report. So you can kind of see there's a lot of things you can do with it, right? That one's, like I said, that's kind of the advanced cable one. But there's really all kinds of reports. And so I encourage you to go through there and, pick different types of reports that you want. Network records reports. OTDR cable report is pretty popular for some folks that like to have data to cut and paste into another spreadsheet. We can also match spreadsheets. So if you have a spreadsheet that you're doing today, there's a good chance we can create a custom report for it. So I do a lot of that for customers. But you'll see here, this is the cable report, right? It's just a bunch of information broken out into lines. So it's really good for like cutting and pasting into other documents. And as far as custom reports go, we can go to Tools, Report. And so I create a lot of custom reports for a lot of different customers. A lot of them is just to match some existing documentation they have from either their customers or something they use internally, or they just want something custom with their logos, their colors, their, all of their branding and stuff on there to make it look a little bit more professional. So some of the different ones that I've done, let me pull up a demo one that I have here. So here's one that I did, just back here in October. Heck, a week ago, I guess. So I'm going to pull that one up. I'll just give it a cable name, cable 1, and it's going to be an Excel because I have some macros in here, which is what's beautiful about the custom report. So I'm going to generate that. Because we're generating these in Excel, we can embed macros into the Excel sheet. So if you want to build formulas, if you want to build pivot tables, whatever you want, just think about the power of Excel. You can build it into the template. And so what I've done for this one here is I have this bidirectional one. And I have different ones that have cover sheets, right? So I can have cover sheets built in, almost like a closeout package where you hit one button and it generates this closeout package looking thing, which is really, really cool, right? And so in this case here, I have this little button over here that says process and rename. What this does is it cleans up some of the naming. It makes everything consistent. It fixes some of the formatting. It, cleans up some of the date formats and whatnot. There's a lot of different things that I do with it. In this case here, I'll just click it. It'll rename everything. So you see how some things change. It also created a table of content. This is really important if you have a lot of fibers. So if you're doing an 864, you don't want to scroll over to 432. You really want to hyperlink. And so I created this table of content. It doesn't refresh unless you push that button. And so if it refreshed all the time, it would drag down the software. Here's a job information, high-level job information. You can see the branding and the coloring. These are Exfo approved colors. I did a span report, and so this is the OLTS stuff. So location A, location Z, all of the ORL and span information is all in there. Front-end connector, it's one of my favorites I created. Front-end connectors are really critical, and so it shows you the reflection and the loss of the front-end connector on both ends, right? And so this is a really powerful report, just looking at front-end connections. Event loss report. So if you just want to see all the traces at once without scrolling through the tabs, I have this one report that just has all the event information, what's passed or failed. And then we have the individual OTDR bidirectional. So on the left side, we have 1310, and on the right side, we have 1550, and it has all the information, right? It has the bidirectional loss here, the loss from A to Z and Z to A, and the reflection, all of that stuff. So it's all in the report here, and it's separated. And everything prints up nicely. It's all formatted and whatnot. So, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to get to, right? You don't get paid until you get the deliverables and the closeout package and all of that into the system. So hopefully in that 30 minutes, you really understand, kind of the value and the power of FastReporter. We have a FastReporter 2 and now a FastReporter 3. So I will be creating a FastReporter 3 updated guide as well. The workflow is very similar. The interface is different. There's some different feature sets. But like I said, back when I was managing fiber characterization crews, or data in particular, one of the biggest issues I had was managing all of that data, making it consistent, creating reports in a timely manner that looked professional and had all the information that I needed, right? And so FastReporter allows you to do that. It allows you to analyze your data quickly, adjust, reanalyze, and then take that information and put it into a deliverable that you can submit, right? So it really increases your workflow efficiency as far as getting that information. Because, testing is a big part of what goes on with fiber characterization or fiber testing, right? But until you get that data into something that can close out the job, that you can invoice or that you can tell your manager or your supervisor that you're done, until that's in an actual deliverable, spreadsheet or report, then you're still waiting on that stuff, right? And this really streamlines that process. So again, my name is Kevin Pires. I am a senior applications engineer with Exfo, and I thank you very much for your time.